Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete episode 2 of our Rimworld Odyssey playthrough, currently stranded in the Scarlands with Bryan, member of the spacefaring Stars of Som, incapable of violence and accompanied by his colossus toad Heaser. Last time we left off, after crash landing in this wasteland near a toxic lake, we gathered what little resources we could find, employed some creative hunting techniques, and survived, at least for now. But our meals will soon spoil, we barely have any mineable resources nearby, and I'm deadly afraid of our first raid or manhunting animal, which is why, as a call for help perhaps, Bryan is currently launching a sky lantern in the hopes that someone will see it and stop by. Before we find out whether or not his plan succeeds though, let me first of all announce the winners of the Rimworld Odyssey giveaway. In the first episode I asked you to leave a comment with your hopes and suggestions for the series, and 3 lucky winners were chosen from over 2,000 comments, and I'm now asking you to please contact me via email to pete@petecomplete.com. The winners are, first, Sir Redicus, who wants us to explore as many features of the expansion as possible, and I think that is a completionist promise I can make. Next, we have Belzebu's, who joins the chorus of people asking for a Noah's Ark spaceship with each animal on board, very fitting with the completionist nature of the channel, and a lovely challenge that I had on my list of ideas as well. Very happy to see that this resonates with so many of you. Finally, winner number 3 is Hans de Puit, who would love to see a raiding playthrough, first local villages, then the entire planet using a spaceship. Now, I'm not entirely sure about this one, considering our starting pawn is incapable of violence, but who knows what kinds of harsh lessons the Scarlands teach Bryan about what it takes to survive, and I have to agree, using a spaceship to raid hostile faction bases sounds pretty damn cool to me, so I'm not going to say no to this one outright. So those would be the 3 winners, Sir Redicus, Belzebu's and Hans de Puit. Again, please send me a message to pete@petecomplete.com so that we can sort everything out. To all the rest, thank you so much for participating. Your comments were definitely not in vain. I have made so many notes from your ideas and could probably now fill several playthroughs with all the things you came up with, so thank you very much for that. Now, in typical Randy fashion, the whole sky lantern thing does not quite go according to plan. Looks like our first raid has arrived, a single enemy with a club, hopefully manageable. Our cry for help then sadly also goes unanswered. Despite a quality of 70%, the Somnari Skyfire remains unimpressive, so we won't receive any visitors, and most importantly, no additional colonists. Our lone raider, meanwhile, seems to be running straight into the boghounds, and the 2 of them are hungry, and most definitely more than he bargained for. So, that's our first raid taken care of, I guess, but the boghounds don't let up. They want this guy dead and ready to snack upon. Now, one of the neat side effects here, one of the boghounds suffered an injury that will become fatal in about 20 hours. Rather useful, I would say, to bridge the gap between our remaining meals spoiling and our rice being ready for the harvest. Now, after a quick nap, Bryan heads over to the eastern edge of the map to harvest some wood. Then he cleans his little shelter, which actually looks somewhat presentable at this point. And after the rest of the afternoon is spent researching, we rejoin Bryan in the evening. The boghounds have moved on from their kill, so we can scavenge the remains. 1 unit of herbal medicine and a smoke leaf joint are now transferred into our possession. During Bryan's morning prayer for rescue, an eclipse then strikes the Scarlands. Usually this is not the most troubling event, but in this case it slows down our plant growth, and we need that first rice harvest soon, I'm afraid. After all, we probably can't rely on lucky animal kills for too much longer. A few moments later then we receive our first quest, and it is the Odyssey Introduction quest. Accepting this is our way to eventually build our very own spaceship. This quest here will only give us a graph engine and a few supplies to work with, but that engine is the heart and soul of any graph ship we can build, so let's see where exactly it crash lands and how easily accessible it is. Right, so of course it has to come down on the other side of the toxic lake. Either way, the engine is still in one piece, but of course won't go anywhere in this state. Scattered all around it are over 300 of these grav-light panels, together with some mechanoid ship chunks and some dead mechs as well. All fine and good, but sadly nothing we can work with at this point. At the very least, we want to unlock the basic grav tech research first, and as you can see, that one is locked behind electricity. And considering that Bryan here does not seem to be particularly capable of researching anything that does not concern animals or plants, he is unfortunately nowhere near building his own spaceship at the moment. On the bright side, he is capable of sneaking by the one remaining boghound to pick up the corpse of the other one. We're not going to butcher it just yet though, we still have a few meals left in storage and this will have to last us for as long as possible. Well, so much for the meals I suppose, but Bryan really couldn't eat any more. In that case, we might as well chop up the boghound now. It yields a decent amount of meat, enough to last us until our rice is ready to be harvested. That is, if the eclipse ends soon. So, with a freshly refueled campfire, we spent the evening cooking a few meals, and then, as Bryan gets some rest, we receive our first visitors. A trade caravan, and a sizable one at that. And they are not tribals either, so they can hold their own in combat. First of all, though, we're going to sell them our pigskin, dog leather and the smoke leaf joint in exchange for a bit more meat. It's not much, but at the moment it seems like the most pressing issue to me. Then, after cooking all the remaining meals that we can and the eclipse finally ending, I think it's time that we start to crack open some of these rooms in the ruins around us. This is a unique feature of the Scarlands biome. There is unfortunately a small chance of finding mechs or insects inside. Now the first one here seems clear, but how about the other one? As you can see, not so much. There's an insect hive alongside its inhabitants. One of those, a locust, a new type of insect added by the Odyssey expansion, capable of flying short distances and doing so quite quickly. Not exactly the type of enemy we want to stay close to, but in Bryan's case that goes for pretty much any bug we find. So we run away and let our visitors take care of the issue. They would not attack the insects all by themselves, but the hive they will go for. Let's sit back and see how this one unfolds. Alright, a decent amount of friendly fire later, the bugs are dead. The traders are now going to work on the insect hive, and sadly we can't really stop them. And it also seems like we have found yet another target for them. The ruins surrounding Bryan's shelter infested by insects, and our trade caravan here seems to have a few folks a little too eager to rush ahead, as the first of their fighters goes down. And with the rest of their troops slowly trickling in one by one, the traders don't really do themselves any favors here. Eventually they all swarm in, but they once again also deliver a healthy dose of friendly fire, resulting in quite a few injuries that would have been avoidable, I think. Nonetheless, the hive has been cleared. We can immediately take ownership of the insect jelly and promptly sell it to the caravan in exchange for a cowboy hat and 2 chickens, a hen and a rooster, perhaps the beginnings of Bryan's arc, at the very least another source of food in the form of eggs. The hen will now be named Curly, the rooster Caven, both names from the list of channel supporters in the naming rights tier and above. Now, Curly did unfortunately also get injured in the fight, and with a nasty cut on her neck will die soon. Bryan is quick on the scene though to stop the bleeding. His medical skill of 3 is nothing groundbreaking, but enough to get the job done. Then we let the animals roam. Chickens are pen animals unfortunately, but we don't have the time or the materials to construct one for them at the moment, so we'll leave them to their own devices. Equip the new hat and open up one more room near the lake. This one thankfully has no enemies in it, but a component box. We'll leave that one closed for the moment though, as it will only increase colony wealth. The last room we open then also empty, apart from ancient chem barrels, sadly without any chem fuel left inside. So up next, let us take care of the wounded caravan guard Leonard here, who got downed fighting for us. And just as we do, Randy sends the next threat our way, man-hunting raccoons. Now, luckily, with so little wildlife inhabiting the Scarlands, a mass manhunter event like this only affects a small number of animals, in this case 2, but the trade caravan also decides to pack up and leave at this exact point in time, not only leaving their wounded comrade behind, but also potentially forcing Bryan to deal with the manhunters himself. Thankfully, this is where the trader's numerous injuries come into play. They are rather slow to leave the map and thus get caught by the raccoons, and so we get them to do one last job for us. The only downside, the raccoon also dragged the last boghound back towards our shelter, and while it will be content for a while feeding on the dead animal, it will only be a matter of time until it sets its eyes on us as its prey. We'll have to deal with that later though. For now, we simply cannot pass up the opportunity to strip Leonard of his gear, even if it causes a nasty faction relationship penalty. But an infection has set in, and while that one unit of herbal medicine we gathered earlier was enough to stabilize Leonard, his odds of making it are not exactly great. Still, we have one more ace up our sleeve. Inside that first room that we opened, a medicine pallet can be salvaged. The medicine inside will now be used to treat Leonard's infection. I think this fits Bryan's character somewhat. He wouldn't want to let the poor fellow die after all he's done, but he probably also doesn't want to be reminded of his presence all the time. I imagine Bryan being a little awkward around others. So then, with the infection tended, our protagonist gets some rest, and on the next morning it's time to equip Leonard's old clothing. A duster, flak vest and flak pants, and a button-down shirt, some proper gear for the first time since crash landing here. And so begins the big butchery. Dead raccoons, dead bugs, and a dead duck that came with the caravan but died in the fight will all be chopped up over the next few hours. We want to make sure not to do them all in one go though, to stretch out the availability of fresh meat a little bit. That boghound is also making me, and probably Bryan too, extremely anxious, so let's try that roof collapse trick once more. No guarantee that it will cause an injury severe enough to take it down, but I think we just have to try it. It's just getting a little too close for comfort. And there we go, the trap is sprung and once again works the way I had hoped it would. The boghound loses an eye and will die in 20 hours. Another potential threat removed. It is infected by scaria though, so it likely won't yield anything. In the evening then we can watch Bryan harvest some more wood. All that meat isn't going to cook itself after all, and we are also informed that Leonard is capable of walking again, so we could now allow him to leave and to follow his caravan. However, while I'm confident that we will beat it, the infection is still progressing and will likely down him before he can get far, so we'll wait a little while longer, get some light going inside Bryan's small chamber, and then as Leonard reaches infection immunity, we can allow him to leave. Imprisoning him to force him into our colony does not strike me like something Bryan would do, as much help as it would be for our struggling taxonomist. It takes our patient a few hours to make it off the map, but eventually our faction relations improve by 16 points. Overall, not a bad price to pay for a full outfit of protective gear. At this point, we also have a healthy supply of insect meat in storage and can now finally bring in the first rice harvest too. The main challenge will be processing all that meat before it spoils. Turning it into meals would not make a lot of sense, as they too would spoil before we can eat even half of them. So for starters, let's use some insect meat to begin training our colossus toad Heaser. His intelligence is advanced enough to learn how to guard Bryan and to attack hostiles. Probably not a task we want him to do regularly. He is just a toad after all, albeit a massive one, but against small critters it could come in handy. Then we use the night to sow out new rice. Our field size has slightly increased to account for the new animals, and then we cook up our meat, the good stuff first, and if we still have time, we'll use some insect meat too, but that's not going to help Bryan's mood even if turned into meals. That mood, by the way, has been surprisingly stable so far, no mental breaks yet, mostly thanks to the recluse trait. Let's hope it stays that way. As Bryan gets some rest, another event, and it seems Randy's and our wishes align for this series. 3 goats have joined us, out of the blue, but I have to say, it is very fitting. 2 females and a male, a good composition. Let's name them. Female 1 becomes Celonic after a channel member, female 2 is named Lemon Sprinkles after a patron supporter, and the male will now go by Corsaro after channel member Corsaro1. I've put up some animal sleeping spots near the base, so they should move over there on their own, a neat trick that you can employ to avoid lengthy trips halfway across the map. With the number of animals under Bryan's care now increasing to 6, I've also made the decision to turn our rice and insect meat into kibble. Yes, I know, it is not the most efficient food type, and Bryan won't enjoy eating it if he has to, but I just hope that we can last a few more days on other food sources with him until we get a more stable supply of hay grass for the animals and other crops for Bryan to turn into meals or baby food. Without the ability to make pemmican, kibble is unfortunately the only way to preserve all that meat we have, and even using up all the rice probably won't avoid some insect meat spoiling entirely, and I just feel like it would fit Bryan's character to sacrifice a little food for himself so that his animals are taken care of. Just as he ventures out to pick some berries, we are then approached by another group of traders, much smaller this one, and we can sell them what is left of the previous caravan in exchange for food and medicine. After all, who needs a fire foam pack if you're starving to death? Since almost all of the rice has been used already, we then spent the night cooking the remaining meat into meals, even if some of them might spoil. As you can see, our 3 goats have made it to our animal sleeping area, an area that we should soon protect a little better, I think. One hungry boghound could wreak havoc in here. The next morning remains fairly uneventful. Our food supply is looking somewhat stable for now, even if we lost some meat and meals to spoilage during the night, and it also appears as if the one Bryan just ate wasn't good anymore either. Food poisoning is something you can probably not avoid entirely in a setting like this. While a sick Bryan then ropes together the animals to keep them from roaming away, our male goat Corsaro also comes down with the flu. Let's take care of that immediately. It should hopefully be enough to tend without medicine here, but if it gets worse we can slap some on the next round. Then we deconstruct some ruins for steel, a tedious affair while suffering from food poisoning I think, but Bryan manages somehow, and after spending most of the following day in bed we can rejoin him on the next morning. The food poisoning has been survived, and we have just gathered enough steel to finally be able to construct a proper stove. This will be a much more economical solution for cooking with wood, using only fuel when we actually make something, contrary to the campfire that has been swallowing wood like crazy these last few days. So, things are looking up. Bryan can now also fill in one of the craters here, blocking a large part of fertile soil that we now want to plant more hay grass on. I honestly did not expect to amass such a sizable flock of animals so early, but I like the direction we're going. Let's embrace the livestock lifestyle, serve some kibble for our animals to feed on, and bring in our very first batch of fresh milk from our goat Lemon Sprinkles. Speaking of animal products, we also have a good number of chicken eggs in storage. 2 of them are in fact also fertilized, and the chicks have just hatched. It's 2 males unfortunately. I had hoped for more females. However, we can't really do anything about it. Since Bryan is incapable of violence, he cannot slaughter them, and locking them in somewhere to starve would eventually yield so little meat that it's probably better to just raise them. In the beginning, they barely need any food anyway. Still, I won't give them any names just yet. I haven't exactly made up my mind about their future. So, Bryan's little animal farm grows to 8 animals, already more than we had in our entire last playthrough, I believe. And maybe we can even grow the number of colonists soon, as we receive a quest. An Itakin is being held prisoner nearby and asks us to break him out. We don't learn more about him, but his highest skill is animals, so that could be fitting. However, considering Bryan's inaptitude with anything violent, and the fact that the enemy camp is a good distance away from our home, I am not entirely sure if this is a quest worth taking. Let me know in the comments what you think about it, and with Bryan making a taming breakthrough and successfully teaching his toad Heaser how to defend his master, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut for today. However, it is not the end of the video yet, because the first episode last week produced an absolutely enormous amount of fan art that we now all get to marvel at. Thank you all so much to everyone who submitted something, and if you have a work of yours to share, the best way to do so is via email to pete@petecomplete.com. Now, I'm hoping that we can pick up the pace a bit over the course of the next few videos. At the moment, our lack of research is hampering most of our progress, I feel. But even if Bryan were a bit more capable on that front, all by himself he likely wouldn't get us all that far anyway. At the moment, he barely gets to spend time at the research bench as it is. Simply trying to keep himself alive is already taking up most of his time, so a second colonist is sorely needed, and I hope that we can perhaps acquire one next time. If you have any ideas or suggestions on how we might accomplish that while still following the little narrative we've got going on here, then I'd be more than happy to read about them in the comments. For today, let's wrap things up with the last pieces of fan art. I hope you enjoyed this second episode of our new adventure, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or become a channel member or Patreon supporter. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.